Today is November 15th, 2023. Israel continues its military operations in and around Gaza, specifically northern Gaza. International outcry continues to grow, and the impacts of these military operations grow with them. I want to start by looking at liveuamap.com. It is a live map. It is pro-Western, so please keep that in mind when we look at it. This is Israel, the occupied territories, and if we zoom in close to the Egyptian border, we see the Gaza Strip. Israel is focused on northern Gaza, Gaza City, and the surrounding areas. And as you can see, they have the entire northern Gaza completely encircled by Israeli forces, not only along this boundary here, this fortified boundary here. They have conducted these incursions, cutting northern Gaza off from the rest of the Strip, and their forces have completely worked their way up and down the coast, tightening this encirclement around Gaza City, the Hamas fighters, the other militant groups there, as well as the sizable civilian population trapped in there. And we can just take a look at headlines today, this week. This is from The Guardian. IDF says it has entered Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital in targeted operation against Hamas. Gaza Health Ministry says tanks and dozens of soldiers inside complex where more than 1,000 Palestinian patients, doctors, and displaced people are believed to be sheltering. And if you look at the footage of this and other hospitals, just as I explained about the hospital where this strike took place in the parking lot, it's not just in the hospital, but all around the hospital, people are taking shelter. There's an excess of patients. There's not enough room, so patients are actually outside the hospital, where some of them are being treated outside in the streets, in the parking lots. We have to keep that in mind. The article says Israeli troops entered the Al-Shifa hospital early on Wednesday, conducted what they called a precise and targeted operation against Hamas in a specified area of the medical complex. The decision to send troops into the hospital marks an escalation of Israel's offensive in Gaza and will fuel calls for a ceasefire that Israel has so far resisted. And Israel has rejected ceasefires, and they've also refused a lot of these humanitarian pauses that they've been asked to observe. The article also says fighting has raged around Shifa hospital compound for many days, trapping around 1,200 patients and staff. The hospital, Gaza's biggest, has become a strategic objective for Israel, which says there is a Hamas command center in bunkers underneath. And it doesn't make it clear whether, and I don't think that the Israeli administration or military has made it clear whether they're just going to clear the hospital and leave it, or if they're going to permanently occupy it. Israel continuously claims that this operation is meant to eliminate Hamas. But as Alexander Mikuris of the Durand and other analysts have been pointing out recently, Hamas is a network. It exists far beyond Gaza. It exists well outside of Palestine and Israel. It exists across the Arab world and the Muslim world and even beyond that. So Israel is clearly not genuinely intent on eliminating Hamas. They're more intent on clearing northern Gaza and controlling northern Gaza, and perhaps even beyond northern Gaza. And beyond that, they're creating a significant provocation in the region that threatens to derail the pivot or the transformation that has been taking place in recent years away from U.S. influence and U.S. divide and conquer in the region and toward a multipolar balance of power and the repairing of relations between otherwise supposedly implacable enemies. We have to remember U.S. so-called security architecture in the Middle East was simply a series of conflicts that the U.S. managed, deliberately fueled, between one half of the region against the other. One half of the region depended on the U.S. for protection and so-called security, U.S. bases, the flow of U.S. arms to their respective militaries, while the U.S. targeted the other half of the region with military aggression, both direct and by proxy. So this Israeli operation, it clearly isn't going to succeed in eliminating Hamas, because Hamas exists beyond all of Gaza, not just northern Gaza, all of Gaza. What it is a continuous provocation. It is also the erasure of Gaza, starting with northern Gaza. And it is designed and being done in the most offensive way possible, meant to maximize provocation. It's putting huge pressure on the governments in the region to react, to be provoked by this. But so far, we've seen immense restraint all across the region. And we've seen nations like Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Syria working with each other, coordinating in a way to respond to this without falling into the trap that Israel and their U.S. backers are trying to set here. As the Israeli military flattens northern Gaza, both by air and now on the ground, with long-range weapons, also tanks, you can see by this time-lapse here, I found this on Telegram, it's very helpful. It shows you how the Israeli military incursion evolved, cutting off Gaza City from the rest of the Strip, and this incremental tightening of control around Gaza City. And then we see articles like this from the BBC. Israel confirms death of soldier held hostage in Gaza. And that is a photo of her, a corporal in the Israeli military. And even though the article doesn't make it clear how she died, she was being held hostage by Hamas, it basically implies that it was most likely Israeli bombing. And again, people have to remember, the current Israeli administration is not making decisions that reflect the best interests of the Israeli people or even the Israeli state. It is pursuing the most provocative course of action possible. It is attempting to stir up the region to either slow down, stop, or even reverse this transformation that has taken place, diminishing U.S. influence over the region, undermining efforts by the U.S. to divide and control the region, and the region working together and moving on without the United States. And this also leaves any proxies of the U.S. who are still invested in a U.S.-led order in the region, leaving them incredibly and increasingly isolated. And we have to remember that the goal here is to provoke conflict. And this is the whole reason why the current Israeli administration, the Netanyahu administration, helped maneuver Hamas into power in the first place. It was meant to create and perpetuate a process of self-destruction both for Israel and for Palestine. We're watching this process of provocation, with Israel almost going out of their way to maximize that provocation. We watch the world recoiling in shock, and we're watching more and more nations attempting to put pressure on Israel. And we even see the U.S. rhetorically demanding restraint from Israel. But then, all while we hear this rhetoric from Washington, this is what is actually happening. So this is from Bloomberg. This is from yesterday, November 14th, 2023. U.S. is quietly sending Israel more ammunition, missiles. And there's actually a lot of information in here about what the United States is sending Israel. The article says the Pentagon has quietly ramped up military aid to Israel, delivering on requests that include more laser-guided missiles for its Apache gunship fleet, as well as 155mm artillery shells, night vision devices, bunker buster, munitions, and new army vehicles, according to an internal Defense Department list. The weapons pipeline to Israel is extending beyond the well-publicized provision of Iron Dome interceptors and Boeing Corporation smart bombs. It continues even as the Biden administration officials increasingly caution Israel about trying to avoid civilian casualties in the Gaza Strip. So this rhetoric from Washington, this is for public relations, has nothing to do with what Washington would really like to see from Israel. They want to maximize provocations over this conflict. At any point in time, they could cut the weapons flow, and this would severely limit or force Israel to stop altogether, but they're not going to. The article continues. It says the arms are already being shipped, or the Defense Department is working to make them available from stockpiles in the US and Europe, according to the document reviewed by Bloomberg News. As of late October, for example, all 36,000 rounds of 30 millimeter cannon ammunition, 1,800 of the requested M141 bunker buster munitions, and at least 3,500 night vision devices were delivered, the tally shows. So that was already sent. And then it gives some more details on what these weapons actually are. So they talked about laser guided missiles. It says the ammunition for the AH-64 Apache helicopter gunships includes about 2,000 Hellfire laser guided missiles made by Lockheed Martin Corporation, some of which Israel has transferred to its forces as U.S. Army teams seek supplies from stocks in Germany and South Korea, according to the tally. It also includes more than 36,000 rounds of 30 millimeter ammunition to be fired by the Apache's cannon. Israel's defense forces have flown the Boeing-built Apaches for years. It also talks about the 155 millimeter artillery shells. Israel has requested more than 57,000 155 millimeter high explosive artillery shells and 20,000 M4A1 rifles, as many as 5,000 PVS-14 night vision devices, 3,000 M141 handheld bunker buster munitions that U.S. Central Command is supplying, 400 120 millimeter mortars, and 75 of the Army and Marine Corps' new Joint Light Tactical Vehicle, which is replacing the Hummer. According to the tally, the U.S. has also donated its inventory of 312 Tamir missile interceptors. The Army's 2 Iron Dome batteries are traveling to Israel by sea lift. So all of this air defense, all of these munitions, weapons and munitions, is all being set. It's either already delivered or on its way. And then it says, Israel's also requesting 200 armor-piercing Switchblade 600 dive-bombing drones made by AeroVironment Incorporated. Ukraine has bought these devices directly from the company. The U.S. Army doesn't have any Switchblade 600s in its inventory. It's unclear whether AeroVironment has the drones in stock or would need to build them. An AeroVironment spokesperson declined to comment, and then it was talking about all kinds of creative ways the U.S. could make these drones available. And we remember that these Switchblade drones, whatever version, were mostly useless. I didn't hear of any success stories of them being used in Ukraine against Russian forces. You have to remember the environment there, though, is completely different than in Gaza. The Russian military has some of the best air defenses and electronic warfare systems in the world, and the scale of the fighting, the type of fighting, is entirely different. It's being done at incredibly long ranges. Most of the time, this is not the same. These are not the same conditions that you will see in Gaza. Remember that Israel is mostly killing civilians. It is flattening northern Gaza right now, and Hamas, whatever you think of them, they are relatively lightly armed and ill-equipped compared to the Russian or Ukrainian military. There's a significant amount of disparity between the Israeli military and Hamas, the forces that it has in Gaza right now. We look at the flow of weapons from the U.S. to Israel, and it suggests, but it by no means guarantees, that Israel is planning on a very long military operation, much longer than previous incursions into Gaza. I've talked about the 2008-2009 Operation Cast Lead. That lasted about 3 weeks, and that was a surprise operation, attack, and incursion into Gaza, very similar to this one, but just at a much quicker pace. They encircled Gaza City, and they conducted incursions deep into the urban terrain of Gaza City. If Israel paces itself, and it continues to receive huge amounts of armaments from the United States, it's almost a certainty that they can encircle, clear, and hold northern Gaza. Now, I've talked about other limiting factors. If they are rushing to achieve this, they may rush faster than their ability to logistically sustain these operations. But if they go slowly, and they're willing to pay the political price of doing so, then militarily they can do this. And there are other factors that could limit or force Israel to call off this operation, and that includes if it begins sustaining extremely high losses in terms of men and equipment. So you have these battle-ready brigades that Israel is using, separate from the 300,000 reservists that they called up, and they start losing very large numbers. That will be a serious blow to the Israeli military. That might convince military leadership, if not political leadership, that this would need to be stopped sooner rather than later. Also, the loss of tanks, for example, tanks and armored personnel carriers. If they begin losing these, whether they're disabled or destroyed, if they're not able to keep a significant number of them operational and ready, both for this current operation and any potential contingency, they might have to call this off. Now, I've been looking at footage of the fighting put out by both sides, by the Israeli military and also Hamas. And so far, the footage is inconclusive. The vector sum of the fighting is very difficult to determine. I've watched Hamas videos of fighters ambushing Israeli armor. I've talked about this before. I've seen more recent footage, and we see RPG attacks on these tanks, a rocket-propelled grenade. Some of the footage, it's difficult to see whether or not the RPG actually hit the tank or not. We see an explosion, but it's hard to see where it actually hit. We also don't see any revealing footage afterwards of the aftermath of what the RPG actually did to the tank. Did it penetrate the armor? Did it disable it? Did it destroy the tank? We haven't seen any footage like that makes it very clear that the tank was damaged or destroyed. I've seen footage of RPGs hitting the front of the Merkava tank. The Merkava main battle tank has its engine designed in the front of the tank, which is different than most other main battle tanks, which have their engines in the back. So a RPG round to the front of a tank, if it penetrates, would be catastrophic for most main battle tanks, but for the Merkava, it would be a knockout. They would have to bring it back to the repair facilities to get it fixed, if that was even possible, because the engine would have taken the brunt of the explosion. We simply don't have enough information right now to decide one way or another about how effective Hamas and other militant groups have been fighting throughout this conflict. Eventually, Israel will begin making decisions or making announcements, or information will eventually emerge that will allow us to assess the vector sum of the fighting and determine whether or not Israel's military operation is sustainable over a longer period of time. And the implication of that is, would Israel have the ability to essentially erase northern Gaza, to just flatten it, clear the civilian population out, or reduce it significantly, and then hold it militarily? And this was the same situation during the early days, weeks, and months of the special military operation. It wasn't until the U.S. began announcing that it was going to send M777s and HIMARS and other weapon systems to Ukraine that they weren't trained on, that did not fit into their existing logistic system. It was only until then that we realized that Ukraine's military power has been exhausted, and now the U.S. and its allies were desperate to try to reconstitute its forces. And when you begin throwing weapons and ammunition that is not compatible to what a nation or military had at the beginning of the conflict, you are creating an unsustainable scenario, and a scenario that is very unlikely to result in victory. And that is what we've seen manifest in Ukraine. So we will continue looking for clues regarding the fighting in Gaza that might give us an idea of what is really happening and what could unfold in the intermediate and longer term. My previous video earlier this week was about Ukraine, where the U.S. is waging proxy war against Russia. This conflict in Gaza, this is a part of a front the U.S. maintains against Iran and its allies. And of course, the other front is in Asia Pacific against China. I'll be doing a live stream most likely tomorrow with Angelo Giuliano, we'll be talking about China, where China fits into all of this. We just have to continue to remember that these conflicts are not conducted in isolation of one another. They are all interconnected. This is all about the US attempting to maintain its hegemony over the globe and multipolarism trying to displace US hegemony from all around the globe. So we have to keep an eye on all of that. Until then, if you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing. It's free to do. It helps the channel grow. Check out the video description below for other places you can find and follow my work. There will also be all the links that I reference in the video description below, as well as for ways you could help support my work. I do not monetize my YouTube channel or any of the other social media platforms that I'm on. If you see ads, feel free to skip them. They're not helping me out at all. If you do want to support my work, please do so through Buy Me a Coffee and also Patreon. And to everyone who has been helping out, whether it's month to month or through one-time donations, or even if you're just sharing my work with others online, I greatly appreciate all of that. That's what makes this work possible. So thank you. And as always, thank you for watching.